Hello, and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason, and with me as usual is Rich. Hello, Rich.
What is going on?
Not a whole lot. We've been having quite a flurry of 50-point games in the NBA this season. James Harden with a lot of them, but a lot of players sort of contributing in that. So, leading us to dive into some research on 50-point games, and we got a fun show coming up here.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting as you really can't ignore what James Harden is doing this year and what a lot of guys around the league are doing this year. So we've started to kind of dive into it's a 50-point games. It's a fun little round number that everybody seems to really care a lot about. We care a lot about it as well. So
we do.
It's been fun to kind of look at the research of people that have a ton of them. Wilt Chamberlain has like 250 or something like that, I think. He's got quite a lot. But yeah, James Harden vaulting up the list too. I think he's now in the top 10. I think he's approaching like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in terms of like total 50 points games, or maybe it's 40 point games for him. I forget exactly what the figure was, but either way, it's hard to ignore what's been going on this season with 50 point games. But this episode will be a little bit different because this is going to be about those people that we maybe didn't expect to get some 50 point games, but they still did it anyway. God damn it.
Yes, they did, and you know they tried hard. They accomplished great things, at least for one night, and they're worth celebrating. So we're gonna talk about them. Just for the record, Wilt Chamberlain, 118 50-point games.
Okay, maybe that was 40-point games. I saw he had like 280 or something like that. So yeah. Well, that's not nearly that impressive. Jeez, what was it? Come on, right. Wilt.
Come on,
10 more. It's just 10 extra points, buddy.
Exactly. That's all. Come on. Yeah. Yeah. So I looked, and we're not gonna. I feel like I should share this. So Wilt Chamberlain has more 50-point games than Dominique Wilkins, Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, Pete Maravich, Adrian Dantley, Bob Pettit, Russell Westbrook, Jerry West, George Gervin, Damian Lillard, Larry Bird, Tracy McGrady, Tiny Archibald, Carmelo Anthony, Karl Malone, Moses Malone, Bob McAdoo, George Mikan, Jamal Crawford, Dwayne Wade, Gilbert Arenas, Anthony Davis, Shaquille O'Neal, Klay Thompson, Richie Guerin, and David Robinson combined. So,
is that impressive, though? I mean, let's be honest. Those guys kind of all suck. So, I mean,
okay, all right,
other than Richie Guerin, the rest of those guys are bums.
Right.
So that's really
fair enough. Well, not Jamal Crawford. Jamal Crawford, obviously.
Yeah, Jamal Crawford. Other than Jamal Crawford and Richie Guerin, the rest of those guys, borderline, So, I don't know. I guess that's impressive, but, you know, Gilbert Arenas, come on. I mean, that's not that is, Wilt is ridiculous. Yeah, we've long wanted to do just like, and maybe one of these days, just do an episode of just like Wilt stats. Like, if you do like baseball stats, like Barry Bonds' numbers are just like out of this world, where it's just like, just these things that he did. But the Wilt stats are the same way too. Like you don't do a basketball reference search of some ridiculous thing without Wilt Chamberlain being on it like 6 times. You're like, oh, God damn it. Like, all right. Like, I'm trying to find like, oh, nobody else has obviously done this. And it's like, oh, it's Wilt. And he did it 6 times. Oh, come on. Like, so you almost have to have like a non-Wilt division when you do these things. Yeah, he is good. Wilt Chamberlain, good.
He was good. Yes. Yeah, there have been nearly 650 plus point games in combined NBA and ABA history. And, like we said, most of them, Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Rick Barry, Elgin Baylor, guys like that, James Harden climbing up that list. And then we have Walt Wesley.
Yes, of course.
Cleveland Cavaliers. Hit 50.
Cavaliers legend.
Yes.
Walt Wesley.
Well, yeah, for a while he held
they didn't have any legends, so yeah.
He held this scoring record for the franchise for 34 years, starting in February 19th, 1971. In their very first season in the league, he scored 50 points against his former team, the Cincinnati Royals. And Wesley averaged 8.5 points per game in 17.5 minutes per game throughout his career. He played 500 total games in his career, played for 8 teams in 10 years. Now, that season, he did boost those averages quite a bit. He had 17.7 points per game, 8.7 rebounds per game. But I would say in terms of modern equivalent, this is sort of like John Henson having a 50-point game. Like in terms of, career marks, in terms of likelihood of that happening, that would be about the, ridiculous level in which he kind of came out of nowhere and did this.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkable. Yeah, and that's going to be the kind of the theme of the show is guys that just it's like 50 points. Like that doesn't seem like that guy should have that or whatever. Yeah, like John Henson's a great comp there. It's just like John Henson's a good player. It's a solid role player, but like 50 points, that's a lot of points. Like there's no way that so that'll be kind of thing. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean the 17.7 points per game is pretty good, and it's the expansion Cavs, which obviously has a little bit of a caveat to it. But we're going to see that a few times throughout this. Is like bad teams need people to score for them, and often these guys that maybe in full, their career isn't all that great, will have these sort of explosions for teams that aren't very good or whatnot. But, it's kind of an interesting balance of wins and losses throughout these few guys that we have up here. But Walt Wesley, a good one to start off with here.
Yeah, he had 15 wins in this, it was one of 15 wins for the Cavs this year. The Cavs did win this game over the Royals. And 2 days later, Wesley had 30 points and 21 rebounds against Portland, another expansion team that year. So, apparently, if you look over the rest of his career outside of this season, his scoring average of 6.9 points. So this season did quite a bit to boost that average. And like we said, he held the scoring record for more than 30 years for the franchise until LeBron broke it in 2005.
Oh,
yeah.
Cavaliers.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Yeah. And they had some good players, obviously, during that time, but no one, a little surprised Brad Daugherty never broke that or what have you. But Larry Nance or whatever. But yes, and he was also part of the trade that sent Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers. In fact, he, along with Kareem, went to the Lakers for the 4 players the Bucks got back. And he only played 1 game for the Lakers, opening night against the Knicks at Madison Square Garden. Scored 4 points, was placed on waivers a week later. In fact, when they announced the trade, famously, they actually forgot to mention that he was part of it. The reporter had to clarify later and be like, oh, yeah, Walt Wesley was part of it, too. So
that kind of stinks. Like, you show up to this practice facility, and they're like, oh, Walt, sorry, didn't you know? And no, I didn't. But I could see that happening, though, especially when you're acquiring Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You got bigger things to worry about. So,
slightly bigger focus, yeah, exactly. So,
Our move on now, Larry Miller, Carolina Cougars. Yeah, baby, we're going to the ABA. 67 points for Larry Miller, March 18th, 1972. His career averages 13.6 points per game in about 786 games as well. This is the only ABA 50-point game out of more than 40, so that we could find with someone who averaged less than 15 points per game. So there were other 50-point games, obviously, in the ABA, but the only one that we could find in the research that you can do. ABA stats are still a little wonky to find here, but the only guy that we could find with under 15 points per game in his career for Larry Miller, set an ABA single game scoring record that was never broken. The 67 points were the most that any pro basketball guard had ever scored until Pete Maravich totaled 68 on February 25th, 1977. So yeah, big moment there for Larry Miller and the Carolina Cougars. 67, man, that's a lot of points.
That is, yeah. And yeah, in his previous game, he had gone 11 minutes without scoring against the Nets. So he was benched during that game, and then the very next game comes out for the Cougars, 67 points. And David Freeman wrote a nice some details of the game at his blog, 20-Second Timeout, and actually mentions Woody Page, of course, the famous reporter on ESPN out of Denver, covered it for the Memphis Commercial Appeal. Said that Johnny Newman was guarding Miller for a lot of the game. Not a great defender. In fact, it refers to him as the worst defensive player in basketball. And then Joe Caldwell, his teammate, who was sort of known as for being a malcontent in the ABA, but said, hey, that was a really fun game for me because, one time I'd scored 56 in the ABA, so, I gave him 7 assists. When he got hot, I made sure the ball stayed in his hands. It was one of the most exciting moments for me to be involved when a guy gets hot like that. Somebody has to keep the ball in his hands. And Miller was known for doing a lot of pump faking, but one thing in his stats, he got the line a lot in this one, 17 of 33 free throw attempts, but he shot 25 of 39 and missed 1 3-point attempt, so 67 points without the aid of a three-pointer.
That's pretty good, man.
Yeah,
that is not bad at all. Yeah.
Yes. And unfortunately, 2 days after this game, his house in Greensboro burned down because of a lightning strike.
Oh, jeez.
It's very, very sad. And later on in his ABA career, he joined the San Diego Conquistadors, and Wilt Chamberlain became the coach of the team. And then he immediately benched Miller. Of course, the two people who own the single game points records in their leagues. And Miller just played 7 games in San Diego before he went to the Virginia Squires and ended his career there. Unfortunately, did not. All right, he went to the Squires, and then I think he went to the Utah Stars and ended his career before the merger had a chance to take place. So never played in the NBA.
All right, so move on to our next guy here, Mike Newlin of the New Jersey Nets. He gets 52 points on December 16th, 1979. Career averages of 14.9 points per game in 837 games for Newlin's career. Pretty interesting career here. So he was a second-round pick of the San Diego Rockets in the 1971 draft. He would never play for San Diego, though, as, of course, the Rockets were going to be moving to Houston in 1971. So technically, I think very technically, he is the first in an original, quote-unquote, Houston Rocket, because he was the first player to sign with the team when it was in Houston. So congratulations, Mike Newlin, on being the original Houston Rocket. So there you go, just by virtue of being drafted by San Diego and then signing with Houston. But Newlin was decent enough scorer in his career. He averaged over 15 points per game in 3 of his first 5 seasons. Still, he didn't seem quite capable of this like major point explosion. All right, before this 52-point game, Newlin's highest scoring game was 38 points. But that was when he was on the Rockets. Now he'd becoming New Jersey Nets. The Nets were not very good. And they looked to Newlin to become one of their big scorers. So he had only averaged 10 points per game the prior year with Houston. Upon joining the New Jersey Nets, he explodes. He gets 20.9 points per game that season, and then he caps it off December 16th, 1979, with a 52-point game. He had a few scoring outbursts earlier in the season as well, but nothing compared to the 52 he'd, of course, put up on the Celtics. So I think it's interesting enough that it wasn't like a really bad team. It was the Celtics. They won 61 games that year. They'd lose the Eastern Conference Finals to Philly that year, but yeah, it's not like really, not too much. And I think what's interesting, too, is the prior game, I scored only 4 points against the Cavaliers, who did not get much better after old Walt Wesley. They were still pretty bad for this point. They're not, the greatest team in the world right now. But Newlin shot 19 of 28 from the field, including 13 of 15 from the free throw line. Newlin would have a few more big games throughout his career, or throughout the year, I should say, including a 40-point game in February. But he'd never get back to the 50-point plateau at any point over his career. But I found this pretty interesting. A few years ago, the Rockets.com, or the Rockets official website, did an interview with him and recalled this game a little bit, and then some of his favorite games, like Mike Newlin's favorite highlights or whatever. The first point, he said, "If I had to choose my best personal moment, it would be when I scored a career high 52 points against Larry Bird, Dave Cowens, Dennis Johnson, and the Celtics." But I kept this quote for a big reason. That's the end of the quote about the 52-point game. He doesn't really have much to say about it. But this other part I found very interesting. He said, "The other great moment I remember is one day we were playing the Celtics in the playoffs, and we beat them at the what was it, the Hofheinz Pavilion? I don't even know how to pronounce it.
I believe. Yeah,
Hofheinz Pavilion on national TV. I think someone had like 30 points. Later that day, I went out and played golf, and I shot a 73. Then, later that same night, I played slow pitch softball game, and I hit about 3 or 4 home runs. I just remember that being a specifically great athletic day for me." I'd say that's a pretty good. How do you do all that in one day?
I don't know.
You play a basketball game, and then you golf, and then you play slow pitch softball. It's pretty good. So here's where I'd make a Sid Vicious joke that only like 7 people would get. So I'm just gonna not make it, even though I kind of made it, and you got it, and 7 people got it. But I'll move on. So
all right, fair enough. It's interesting. Newlin's one of the guys. He actually had his peak career scoring years at age 31 and 32 with the Nets, and like the Nets, they weren't good, but that first year they were like a kind of a middle of the road team. They had a better point differential. They were a 34-win team, but they were more like a 38-win team. So you could understand him getting all that like on a terrible team, but like a mediocre team, like that's actually like he wasn't just putting out completely empty stats. Like he was, his efficiency was all right. Like he was effective in that role. It's interesting to be at that age to do that after, I was kind of associated with Houston. I didn't even realize he had played other places in his career. So a fun little fact there. So next we got Freeman Williams of the San Diego Clippers with 51 points on January 19th, 1980. And interestingly enough, he only had a 14.7 points per game, but he managed to do that in 20.5 minutes per game. So a very, very good, points per minute game. But he only had 323 games in his career, which is one of the lowest on this list. And yeah, he was known for as a big scorer in college. He's Portland State's all-time leading scorer, the second leading scorer in Division I history, leading the league in 1978, trailing only Pete Maravich. Would you say, okay, why does he belong on this list? Well, he's sort of famous for being the 8th overall pick of the Celtics, but being part of that huge franchise swap between the Braves / Clippers and Celtics in 1978. He was traded to by the Celtics along with Kevin Kunert, Kermit Washington, and Sidney Wicks to the Clippers for Tony Archibald, Marvin Barnes, Billy Knight, and a couple of second-round picks. One of them ended up being Danny Ainge. Cursed you, Danny Ainge.
I just wanted to make sure that I got Danny Ainge in an episode just to make you happy. So, I could have left that part out. Like, it's really irrelevant what the pick ended up becoming, but it became Danny Ainge. So I just think that we have to make that a winner. All-time winner. All-time winner, Danny Ainge. So.
Yeah. So it didn't really score a lot, at first, but then second and third year he starts to find some success getting behind the 3-point line. The Clippers were kind of one of the first teams to really embrace the 3-point line, and he was taking at his peak he took 2 a game, so it wasn't
right. I mean, but still, at this era, just taking any is like being an elite at that time. So even though it's he made less than 1 a game and he shot 2 a game, it's still just that's pretty impressive. He shot threes like that. Nobody else is really doing that. So
So prior to this game, his highest was 35 a few months prior. And then this game is a 14-point loss to Phoenix. He had 51, 22 of 34 shooting, only 5 of 6 from the free throw line. So a lot of jump shots there, probably. No threes in this game, though. But he would, he'd have a couple years with the Clippers, flirting with 20-point per game averages before ending up going from the Clippers to Atlanta. And things did not go well for his career after that. Kind of bounced around, spent a couple years in the Philippine Basketball Association later on in his career, and he famously scored 82 points, including 10 3-pointers in 1 game. So was also he was the first Clippers player to win a Player of the Month award, and it was the only one in franchise history to do that until Elton Brand did so 25 years later. So
God,
that's yes.
Clippers, yay!
Yes.
My God. Also, we'd be remiss if we did not mention that Freeman Williams had a small part in White Men Can't Jump. He plays fictional playground legend Duck Johnson. So I don't recall that character, but I will go back and watch it now, and I will then now forever know that it is Freeman Williams. I don't think I knew that until today. I don't think I ever knew about Freeman Williams until today either. So, but I'm glad I know about him now. So.
Right. I believe, and I could be misremembering this slightly, so nobody put it on the record, but I do believe that there was a chance that he may have been, that instead of having him part of the trade, that Larry Bird may have ended up being, there was a chance that Larry Bird could have been part of the trade and before, or the pick that became Larry Bird or what have you. It's a little convoluted, so... But yes, there's a chance that Freeman Williams could have been a Celtics legend, and Larry Bird could have been a Clippers bust. So you never know. It's another world, alternate universe.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of a man who was labeled as a bust, but probably should not have been, Joe Barry Carroll. Golden State Warriors, 52 points, March 5th, 1983. So now... He's an interesting part about this list. I don't know that it's unlikely for him to score 50 because he was actually a very productive player. We'll get to it here in a bit, and we've talked about it on the show. But I think, rather than narratives around him, I always like to kind of we always like to kind of dispute them because he gets unfairly labeled as Joe Barely Cares and Just Barely Carroll and all these sort of names that we hear about. And it's mostly because, he had a career average of 17.7 points per game. Not bad at all. 705 games over his career. A very solid NBA career. He's selected by the Golden State Warriors with the first overall pick in the 1980 draft. And that always comes with, a lot of baggage if you're that first overall pick. Worse yet, because he was acquired by the Warriors after they traded Robert Parrish and the draft pick that ended up being Kevin McHale. So no, that's not great. I mean, obviously Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish, some of the backbones of the Boston Celtics dynasties of the 80s or whatever. Yes, Joe Barry Carroll is not those guys, but still, he had a pretty good career, and because he wasn't as good as those, and because he was the first overall pick and didn't, explode onto the scene, and the Boston was as good as they were, he gets unfairly kind of pegged down, and those nicknames kind of stuck with him. But, first few seasons, though, in the league, he was a very, very productive player. He averaged 18.9 points per game and 9.3 rebounds as a rookie. I mean, that's really damn good. He scored a career high of 46 points and led the Warriors in 121 blocks that first season. He was named the all-rookie first team. So he's like a very, very good rookie and a very productive player. We look at this game, we jump ahead a few years here, March 5th, 1983. He put it all together for the best game of his entire career. He scored 51 points. He had flirted with 50 points a few times. He had a 46-point game in February 1981, but nothing like the March 5th game, like we said, when Carroll put up 52. He had 22 of 32 shooting, including 8 of 13 from the free throw line. And interestingly enough about his career as well, just when he kind of seemed to kind of find his place in the NBA, just when he started to kind of feel comfortable, he left. He went to go play in Italy in 1982. 1984, he left the Warriors to go play in Italy. He won both the Italian League Championship and was selected all-league team and won the FIBA Correc Cup. He returned to the NBA the next year, averaged 21.2 points for 2 consecutive seasons under George Karl. And then, in 1987, he was named to the NBA All-Star game. So, really had a pretty solid career. But yeah, I just wanted to put him on this list because he's a guy that just, I think, unfairly gets docked for not being Robert Parrish or Kevin McHale, and that's really not fair for him.
Right. I mean, I think if you didn't know anything about his career, you just knew like his name and his nickname, you would think he'd be like Darko Milicic, or you'd think he'd be
just
like,
this like fat, bad player that didn't care. Yeah, right. It's like no.
Yeah, and maybe the nickname, maybe he didn't care much, maybe he didn't play like he cared a whole lot. But you look at his numbers, especially like early on in his career, like he's producing like, I don't know, like 80% of DeMarcus Cousins' stats. Like, I mean, like that's a good player. That's
right.
And maybe they're empty stats. He didn't play for good teams, and the Warriors were a high paced team, so some of that might be slightly inflated. But he was he was a pretty productive player, a pretty good player who was a number 1 overall pick. So there's that, and of course was the part of a famous trade that led to a Celtics dynasty and led to the Warriors not being really very good for a while. So. I can see where the narrative is, but it's almost like it goes too far where you're kind of like oh yeah, this guy was absolutely trash. It was like, yeah, well no, he was actually like a fairly effective NBA player for quite a long time. So another Warrior who is a part of the annals of 50-point scoring history, Pervis Short, who had 59 points for November 17th, 1984. Another one where it's pretty debatable that he would be considered unlikely, but I just think he's kind of like looped into that name because he was not a tremendously successful or popular player. Never was an all-star. But did average 17.3 points per game over 842 games in his career, most of it with the Warriors. And another Larry Bird connection here, as he was the 5th overall pick of that draft by the Warriors. Larry Bird was picked 6th. So a lot of 50-point scorers in that draft, come to think of it.
Yeah, that's. But there was some interesting stuff with the Larry Bird thing as well. But yeah, maybe Pervis Short then gets a little bit of docked. You'd look at him again and be like, oh my god, they passed up Larry Bird for him. But a solid career. More not Larry Bird career, but a solid career. So.
Yeah, and we'll get to it, but this season, which he does score, he has this game. He averages 28 points this season. I mean, and again, playing on a very high paced team, so it's inflated a little bit. But he had 4 seasons in a row where he averaged 20+ point games. It reminds me a little bit of like Isaiah Thomas in terms of the modern Isaiah Thomas, not the Pistons Isaiah Thomas, where you kind of was a journeyman for our first few years, and then just suddenly kind of blew up and just started having big scoring binges over several seasons. And he definitely had something along those lines. But yeah, it's interesting how at Golden State he kind of emerged a bit, and then the Warriors got Bernard King, which kind of pushed Short to the bench, and he was kind of he played some guard, but I think played mostly forward throughout his career, so he was behind there. And then started working with Pete Newell, who's, of course, famous for working out with guys like, Kermit Washington and other guys helping turn around their career. And then really, picked up his career starting in 83, boosting that scoring average, playing a lot more. And this career high, 59 points, was during a loss. He scored 20 out of 28 field goal attempts, 15 free throws, so a very efficient game. At that point, only 9 other players had scored more points in one game, and it was actually the most points that had been scored in the league since David Thompson and George Gervin had their 73 and 63 points back in April of 78. So this is almost 7 years later, and there was not a 60-point game, this was 59, obviously, but yeah, there had been that many points scored in a game during that time, which is kind of odd, honestly. It's a little bit. It's a fairly long drought for that amount of scoring total to occur.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll move on to the next guy here. I think pretty interesting. Sleepy Floyd, Golden State Warriors again. So the theme here is play for the Warriors. They are often not great, and sometimes you can score a lot of points, but this is not the case here because Sleepy Floyd did this May 10th, 1987. You're thinking to yourself, May 10th, that's pretty late in the season. It was a playoff game. Sleepy Floyd putting 51 up for the Warriors in a playoff game. We'll get to that in a sec. Career averages of 12.8 points per game for him, 957 games. I don't think I knew that Sleepy Floyd had such a prolific career, but he did. So he was drafted by the New Jersey Nets, 13th pick of the 1982 NBA draft. During the middle of his rookie year, Floyd is traded by the Nets with Mickey Johnson to the Golden State Warriors from Michael Ray Richardson. And that really helped his career a lot. Floyd improved on the Warriors. He averaged 16.8 points per game in his first full season with them. During the 1985 season, he averaged a career high 19.5 points per game. 2 seasons later, 18.8 points per game, and he earned a spot on the 1987 NBA All-Star team. So he joined Joe Barry Carroll on the All-Star team there. But it was during the 1987 playoffs that Floyd had an all-time great performance. He scored 51 points against the Lakers in Game 4 of the Western Conference semifinals. That's a big deal. The Lakers are good, obviously, at this point. And this avoided a sweep for the Warriors as well. They were about to get swept in this series, but Floyd puts up 51, or 51, I should say, on 18 of 26 shooting, including 2 of 3 from a three-point line and 13 of 14 from the free throw line. So, some records still to this day for Sleepy Floyd. He still holds the NBA playoff record for most points scored in a quarter with 29, as well as most points scored in a half with 39 as well. And then in December 1987, Floyd is traded with our good friend Joe Barry Carroll again. Hey, what's up? To the Houston Rockets for Ralph Sampson and Steve Harris. Floyd remained with the Rockets until 1993 when he moved on to the Spurs, just missing out on the Rockets' back-to-back championships, of course. And then Floyd played for a few more years even after that. Like, I did not know until today that his career was as long as it was. I mean, guy was drafted in the early 80s and played until, pretty far into the 90s. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, 95 was his last season with the Nets, and he had 7 seasons where he played all 82 games. So that's I actually played more
games. Not sleepy at all. No, he was very awake. Awake, yes. Floyd.
Awake Floyd. Yeah, it's not a good nickname.
Awake and alert Floyd.
Yeah, very alert. Very. Well, I don't know. Maybe he was resting during some of those games. Maybe he was able to conserve his energy. That's why he played some of the games. Maybe he was sleepy outside of the games. Maybe he got his sleep. And then when he came,
right? Maybe he was ahead of, because now the NBA is all about guys being on sleep schedules and making sure that sleep is such a big deal. And the new, market inefficiency is sleep. Maybe Sleepy Floyd was ahead of the game there. He's like, no, guys, I'm not going out to party. I'm going out to sleep. And he got the name for it. But hey, he got to play a long career. So good for him.
Very good. Good for him. Next, we have Charles Smith of the Los Angeles Clippers, 52 points on December 1st, 1990. And he had career averages of 14.4 points per game in 564 games. He had pretty high hopes coming into the league, was 3rd overall in the 88 draft by the 76ers, but was actually traded immediately to the Clippers for Hersey Hawkins and a 1989 first-round draft pick. So yeah, I mean, at the time, he was one of the better players on the team because he was one of the better scorers and rebounders. But so maybe not completely out of nowhere, despite his career numbers. But still, Charles Smith, you don't think of him as, he was a good kind of like, defender, rebounder for the mid-90s Knicks. That's kind of, the first thing I think of him is more just kind of rugged power forward. Like, scored a little, rebounded enough, but not really, not a guy you would necessarily think would be scoring 52 points in a game.
No, absolutely not. And I think he's also famous, of course, for years later, you mentioned the Knicks. He's famous for the guy that was blocked 4 times directly under the basket.
Oh, that's right.
In the Eastern Conference Finals against the Bulls. So one of the great memories of Knicks past there of just Charles Smith just really, really trying to get the ball into the basket and just, Horace Grant and Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen just not letting him do that. So it's Charles Smith there. But pretty good game. The career high 52 points against the Nuggets. And these were the Paul Westhead Nuggets as well. So they were tops in the league in pace and points per game. At this time, they also only won 21 games, so they were also not very good at that. They were giving up points, they were scoring points, but they were not winning many games. And thanks to Smith's 51, the Clippers won by 16, and the Clippers were not very good at this point either. So good win for the Clippers. Smith shot 17 to 27 from the field and 18 to 21 from the free throw line. So a pretty good. And he had flirted with some 50 or some 40-point games here and there, but still to be a 50-point game, he does stand out for sure. And more recently, January 2014, he, along with Dennis Rodman and a few other players, went to North Korea. So you remember the very odd Dennis Rodman's going to North Korea to play basketball thing? Well, Charles Smith was one of those guys too. So I don't know who the other guys were. I didn't look it up, but Charles Smith was one of them. That's all I know. So
hey, remember when our politics were weird? Yeah.
Right. I mean, thankfully, that was the weirdest it ever got, is Dennis Rodman being a diplomat. We're good. It's over. And now everything's fine.
Cool
so
now. Yeah, it's nice.
That's so good. It's so refreshing that in 2019, it's, the crazy days of January 2014, baby. So weird. So in the past. Ooh. So
So speaking of wild and crazy, we go to Nick Anderson next of the Orlando Magic. 50 points.
Is he wild and crazy? Is Nick Anderson wild and crazy? I guess. I guess. Yeah, all right, I'll go with it.
All right, yes. What happens in this game is wild and crazy, perhaps. Even if Nick Anderson himself
you're
is
there.
not wild and crazy.
You're there. You're right.
All right, there we go. So he had 50 points on April 23rd, 1993. This is the only 50-point game off the bench in recorded NBA history, I believe. So pretty interesting there. But before we get into the actual details of the game, which are interesting, I want to mention his career averages at 14.4 points per game in 800 games. So yeah, he didn't start because of a strained hamstring that had him questionable right before tip-off, but he came off the bench 17 of 25 shooting and 12 of 12 from the line. But his scoring explosion was not the story of the game because it was instead Shaq. Shaq, angry about getting dunked on by Derek Coleman during their first meeting, he pulled down the backboard in the first quarter. This was different from a backboard break he'd had a couple months earlier in Phoenix. This one was really, really loud and scary. Basically, the entire stanchion crumbled and falls, which is super dangerous if it came down quick and hit at someone. Unfortunately, no one was hurt. Shaq only had 10 points and 5 rebounds, but obviously that was the talk of the game as they were able to repair that and then play the game, continue the game. And then, the NBA ended up creating Shaq-proof rims between the season and Shaq's second year to prevent that from happening in game. I don't recall there being a rim broken during an NBA game since then. I mean, perhaps it has happened, but do you recall any incident where that
I don't. I want to say there was a game a few years ago where somebody shot the ball and the rim got dislodged a little bit. Forget what it was. It was something like that, or someone was throwing an alley-oop and it got dislodged. But since then, no, I really have not recalled anybody even breaking the rim or breaking the net, or obviously no backboards are broken. And Shaq was decimating backboards at this time. So good idea that they did this. I mean, the one in Phoenix is interesting because the whole glass comes down or whatever, and it's dangerous because glass is falling. Well, this one's bad too because the whole thing just crumbles. If that thing fell on somebody, my God, that would have been awful. Just the entire weight of the backboard and the scoreboard and the shot clock and all that stuff falling on somebody would just been nuts. And it's a weird one too because it kind of crumbles and folds and it's kind of weird and strange and whatnot. And it's unfortunate because it's a very, very overshadowed 50-point game by Nick Anderson because he does it off the bench, which is really remarkable. But the talk of the town was, of course, Shaq just destroying that rim in a very iconic moment as well. But off the top of my head, I can't recall anybody breaking any rims or nets or backboard since then. So.
Yeah, well, if anyone happens to remember, you can get us on Twitter at Over and Back NBA and let us know. If we always encourage little nuggets of information that we may forget while we're recording the show. So speaking of things we might forget, Willie Burton.
Yes.
On December 13th, 1994, 50 points. Career average of only 10.3 points per game, but that was in 21.1 minutes per game, so at least a decent points per minute average. Only played 316 points during his career. And he's, I think, definitely up there in terms of the most obscure players to do this. He was selected by the Heat in the first round, 9th overall in the 1990 NBA draft from the University of Minnesota, and actually was fairly solid, was second team all-rookie, averaged 12 points per game in his career, then kind of fell out of the Heat's rotation, was waived in November 1994. 6 days later, he signed with Philadelphia, and just a month later, in a game against his former Heat team, he exploded for 53 points, which is pretty crazy.
Yes, yeah, and we'll talk about this too because the most crazy thing about this and the reason why Burton usually gets brought up in these conversations of unlikely 50-point games and oddities in NBA history is Burton attempted only 19 field goals in this game, which is an NBA record for fewest field goal attempts in a 50-point game. Burton shot 5 of 8 from 3 and a ridiculous 24 of 28 from the free throw line. 24 of 28 from the free throw line, just pretty nuts there. This is the 17th time in NBA history, at least according to Basketball Reference Play Index records, that someone had 28 or more free throws in a game, or free throw attempts in a game, I should say. And this one's weird too, because Burton never came close to 50 points ever again. He got to 33 points in February, a few months later, but never even reached 40 points at any other point in his career. So this one really stands out as a unique one. And I remember the Burton one coming up as a comp this year when Klay Thompson did that ridiculous, 50-point game against the Bulls where he basically just came in and shot threes and made every three and then left the game like in the third quarter. And it was like, wow, that seemed like a very efficient 50-point game. Like that has to be the most efficient one ever. And really, when you look at it, Willie Burton has like the most, kind of field goal efficient, potentially, 50-point game in history because he only attempted 19. But it was a lot of free throws, which made it, I'm sure, not a very exciting game and not a very exciting 50-point performance. But still, Willie Burton gets his moment in the sun, so that's good for him.
Yes, and this was the first year in which the the 3-point line was moved in for a couple seasons. So that obviously increased the number of attempts and increased the number of, the chances of getting hot from three, and that helping you get to 40, 50 points in a game. And we'll be looking at that, I think, a little bit more as we if we delve into more 50-point themed episodes. But definitely had something to do with this one. Our next one is from the same team and the same season, Dana Barros, March 14th, 1995, 50 points in the game. Another guy, not much on the career average, 10.5 points per game, although he did do it in 22.9 minutes per game. 850 games in his career, so he certainly had a pretty lengthy career. And then, in his career, he was a first-round pick out of Seattle, but they had another pretty good guard named Gary Payton in front of him, so he was more sort of the backup there. And then, he kind of he was. He did play point guard, but he was a more of a scoring point guard than a distributing point guard. And 95 was by far his best season. He had 20.6 points per game that season. He never had more than 13 outside of that in his first four seasons, and he didn't average. His high was 9.7. So he definitely went up there at age 27. He peaked there on that team, and he was a part of a trade from Seattle to the Charlotte Hornets in exchange for Kendall Gill. And then 2 days later, he went to the Sixers along with Sidney Green and a 1993 draft choice to the Sixers for Hersey Hawkins. So Hersey Hawkins involved in another trade involving a 50-point score going on here. So, and then with the Sixers, he had a career high in minutes per game, field goal percentage. He shot 46.4% from three, which certainly helped his scoring average, as we mentioned, 20.6 points per game. Also had career highs in rebounding and assists. So really quite a tremendous season, a tremendous game. Here's one of those definitely like 1 year wonders of guys like going way above their career norms in just one season. In this game, it was against the defending champion Eastern Rockets, and he was 21 of 26 from the field, 6 of 8 from three, and unlike Willie Burton, not helped by going to the free throw line, he was only 2 for 2 from the free throw line. So
and this puts him in rare company. Only Dana Barros, Klay Thompson, and Steph Curry. So of course, three legends of shooting history. Of course, what the Mount Rushmore of shooting is Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Dana Barros. Of course, can lay claim to shooting 2 or fewer free throws in a 50-point game. So both those guys, Klay Thompson did it earlier this year against the Bulls, as I mentioned, and Steph Curry did it 2 years ago, where he had less than I think he only had 1 free throw that entire game. And Dana Barros, obviously, only 2 for 2 from the free throw line, but. He's a very interesting career here because he's a guy that basically averages under 10, averages 13 1 year, a little over that, then gets 20, and then he's right back to 13, and then he's 8, and then he's 9, and then he's kind of just floating around doing a good role player, but just that kind of 1 year wonder where all of a sudden you look at his stats, you're like 28 points per game. What the hell? What the hell's going on with Dana Barros there? But pretty good season, and it worked out pretty well for him. He was selected to play in the All-Star game. And at season's end, he was voted as the league's most improved player. He also set an NBA record by making at least 1 3-pointer in 89 consecutive games from December 23rd, 1994 until January 10th, 1996. So he made full use of that 3-point line. The record was eventually broken, but pretty long after, though, by Kyle Korver in December of 2013. So Dana Barros keeping that record all the way from 1996 until December 2013. So that's something to be proud of, old Dana.
Yeah, 17 years. That's pretty good. Yeah. Next, we got Tracy Murray of the Washington Wizards. 50 points. This occurred on February 10th, 1998. And this was, he was aided by Rod Strickland, as we'll see in this game. But his career averages 9 points per game and 18.4 minutes per game. So another guy who did pretty well in the points per minutes category. 659 games in his career, so a long career for a relatively low minute career, despite playing for quite a long time. Started his career with the Spurs, and it was pretty brief actually, because he was 7 days after he was drafted by the Spurs, he was traded. In fact, he was traded twice in the same day. First, he went to the Milwaukee Bucks for Dale Ellis, and the Bucks shipped him to Portland for. How do you pronounce it? I've always seen his name.
But I know. I was like, man, I really hope Jason does this one, because I don't know how to pronounce it. I thought you knew how to pronounce it. I never know. I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough one. There's a lot of B's in there, and I don't know there's a lot of A's and a lot of B's, and I feel bad. I do not know how to do it.
We should probably not. Yeah, we should probably not try to embarrass ourselves by.
I'm sorry.
Yes. I believe it is Ala Abdelnaby. So, but that one one threw me. I've seen, but I don't think I've ever actually
had to do it in front of people.
Yes.
Had to on record say the name. No, it's
there
tough.
You go. Well, we always edit it out, I guess. We probably won't do that because we're lazy. No. But yeah. Anyway, yes, he shot. He led the league in 3-point shooting in 93-94 at almost 46%. Was part of the Clyde Drexler deal to the Rockets. Got a ring out of it. Didn't play much, but got a ring out of it. And then after that, went to the expansion Raptors. Had the best year of his career, 16.2 points per game. But then went to the Bullets, who then became the Wizards. And he. And then had his career best night, 50 points against the Warriors, 18 of 29 shooting, 5 of 10 from 3, 9 of 10 from the free throw line. And Rod Strickland had more than 20 assists in this game, so did a lot of setting up for Murray. And this was after he and Murray had a fight in a hotel room earlier that season. So, but they were pals at least for one night. And
I forgot about that. We've talked about that before. I think I forgot that
we did. Yes.
Hey, you know what? Hey, you don't have to like each other to go out there and do your thing. So
right. So good times. Yes, and he only eclipsed 40 points one time prior in his career, but never reached that point again. So definitely a big leap above his career norms.
Absolutely, yeah. And for him, definitely just kind of a journeyman throughout his entire career. As you mentioned, he went to Toronto, he did this, and he was kind of all over the place. I mean, the getting traded, 3 or 4 times, within the first few weeks of being in the NBA was definitely Tracy Murray's career there. So yeah, he stands out as definitely a unique one, but one of my favorite ones of all time, of the most unlikely 50-point games, because I remember watching this live. Tony Delk from the Phoenix Suns, 53 points, January 2nd, 2001. Career averages of 9.1 points per game and 21.5 minutes per game for Delk. 545 games. So he was a solid bench guy, role player. We'll talk about him here in a bit. He was picked 16th overall in the 1996 NBA draft by the Charlotte Hornets. A year later, he was dealt by the Hornets along with Muggsy Bogues to Golden State for B.J. Armstrong. So Charlotte had a lot of really short guys at that time, because Tony Delk was not very tall either, but traded for B.J. Armstrong. He spent a year with Sacramento after that, before making his way to Phoenix in 2000. And then on January 2nd, 2001, Delk rang in the new year with a career-high 53 points on 20 of 27 shooting in an overtime game against his former Kings team. This was the only game of Delk's career in which he scored 30 or more points. Think about that. The only game where he scored 30 or more points. Delk scored only 20 or more points 47 times in his career. So he is definitely not a guy that you would expect to get 50 points, but he did it here. This was just not supposed to happen at all. He bounced around the league. After this, he was traded with Rodney Rogers to the Celtics for Joe Johnson, Milt Palacio, and Randy Brown. He was also found himself involved in a pretty huge trade later in his career with the Mavericks. He, along with Antoine Walker, went to Dallas for Chris Mills, Yuri Welsh, Rafe LaFrentz, and a 2004 first-round pick. This created the Big Four in Dallas with Dirk, Steve Nash, Antoine Jameson, and Antoine Walker. Unfortunately, defense is a thing, and that team didn't do very well because you have to play defense sometimes. And then Walker was traded that year, along with Tony Delk, yet again, to Jason's favorite team ever, the 2003-2004 Atlanta Hawks.
I'm sorry, Rich, I'm going to have to correct you. That is the 2004-2005 Atlanta
Hawks. Oh, I'm so sorry. I would never.
That's all right. And really, we always stress Tony Delk as 2004-2005 Hawks legend Tony Delk. So,
yeah, I'm sorry. I made many mistakes in that last minute.
We did. It's all right.
I hope you can apologize, and I hope we can still do that. We don't have a Tracy Murray, or no, maybe we'll have a Tracy Murray Rod Strickland thing where we hate each other, but still we just come on here every week and bring the goods, even though
sure.
I know that you hate me now for mixing that up, and
that was a worse frub than your a la Abdel Nader.
I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
But they traded for Jason Terry and Allen Henderson, and that seemed to work out pretty well for Dallas, and not as well for the Atlanta Hawks. Delk was eventually dealt a bunch of other times again. So yeah, Delk kind of bounced around a little bit. Then I think he went overseas. He played in Greece and some other places as well. But yeah, I think this game is unique as well. He did not shoot a single 3-pointer in this game as well. So all those points come from 2-point baskets for little Tony Delk on the Phoenix Suns, 53 points, January 2nd, 2001.
Yes, that would have to be one of the last times in which a 50-point game occurred without a 3-pointer, even being taken. I mean, that or being made. That would have to be, unless you're a big man doing it. Maybe that would be a pretty rare occurrence going forward. I think. At this point, yeah. Next, we have Brandon Jennings of the Milwaukee Bucks, 55 points on November 14th, 2009. This one is more unlikely, although the career averages are below 15 points per game, so it's on the lower level of that. But, at his peak, he certainly was a scorer. But I think the fact that it was so early into his career, is only his 7th game into his NBA career where he scored 55 in one game. His career averages were 14.1 points per game, 555 games, at least so far. He has not played this season, but did play last season. Yes, he went scoreless in the first quarter, but had a 29-point third quarter to set this record. He broke the team record for most points by a rookie, previously set by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, pretty good rookie.
Yes.
And the most points overall by a rookie since Earl the Pearl Monroe had 56 in 1968. So was the youngest player ever to score 55. Had the second highest total for any player under 21, only behind LeBron James, and the second most points scored by a Milwaukee Buck behind Michael Redd, who had 57 in 2006. So, he never had a 40-point game again in his career, and only 30-plus games in his career. So that's pretty interesting because, you think of him as definitely at least scoring is kind of his primary skill.
Yeah,
but never really, had a big scoring burst after that. I guess that 50-point game kind of colored, what he was in my mind, because I was surprised that his scoring average was, relatively low for his career.
Yeah, I initially didn't even want to put him on this list because I was like, Brandon Jennings, man, he probably had like a bunch of 40 points because he was a volume scorer in all the sets of the world. Like, give him the ball and let him operate, and a guy of that era for sure, Brandon Jennings. And I think I always think of him as like this incredible scorer because and if you remember that first week that he was in the NBA, he took the NBA by storm, and he was one of a unique guys where he didn't go to college, he went overseas to play out of high school, so he could sign endorsement deals and that sort of stuff. So he comes in the league, and within the first week and the first really half of the year, it's like, holy crap, Brandon Jennings is here, and he's here to stay, and oh my god. And then I look and I'm like, he never had another 40-point game. Like, really? He just felt like a guy who would have racked a lot of those up, but he never did. So I think this is pretty interesting that we do. Yeah, that you had the same reaction that I did, where I'm like, oh really? Like, I really thought he would have had a lot more than he did. So I thought that was pretty interesting here. But the next guy I think is one of the more interesting guys on this entire list. I remember this game. I remember this well. I know you remember it well. Andre Miller, Portland Trailblazers, 52 points, January 30th, 2010. Career averages 12.5 points per game in 1,304 games for Andre Miller, the professor. But the professor dropped 50. I'm shocked. It's true though. On January 30th, 2010, Miller scored a career high 52 points while making 22 of 31 field goal attempts in an overtime win against the Dallas Mavericks. And you don't need us to tell us how unprecedented this is. Most of you listening to this have watched Andre Miller play basketball. He was not known as a scorer. He had only 13 30-plus point scoring games his entire career, and obviously none over 40 points, except this 52-pointer. So it really stands out differently. To put this into context, Andre Miller has more 20-plus assist games, too, than he does 40-plus point games. So, he was definitely known as more of kind of an all-around player, good point guard, passer, good defense, steals, that sort of stuff than points. But, man, he did this, and, what's interesting, too, is he did it all by taking and making only one three-pointer. So we mentioned Tony Delk a little bit earlier, not doing any three-pointers. Andre Miller, of course, not known as a long-distance shooter. He takes only one three-pointer this entire game and gets 52 points. My God, I remember this happening and people just losing their minds because it's like, Andre Miller, 50 points? What? No, there's no way.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, and he was 34 at this point, so obviously advanced in his career, although he played several more seasons. And
even when he was young, he kind of played like a 34-year-old too. You know what I mean? Like he was 22, right. And you're like, he looked like a guy at like your YMCA. It was just like he was more about the smarts than it was the athleticism for Rashard Miller at any point in his career. So
yeah, and the Blazers beat the Mavericks in this game 114-112. It went into overtime, so he obviously had some extra time to do this. Scored 7 points in overtime, but 22 of 31 from the field. As you mentioned, 1 of 1 from the 3-point line, 7 of 8 from the free throw line, 11 of 15 from the rim. So quite a nice game there. Although he shot well from basically everywhere on the court. Quite a game for him. Quite a and I think this is definitely, I don't know if it's the most unlikely, but it feels like it's the most random. Like it's the most like out of. Because he's the guy who had by far the longest career out of anybody on this list. And he played so many games. And to have so few 30-plus point games in his career, just to have this one just kind of come out of nowhere is pretty amazing. So this is definitely a fun one. I remember watching some of this one, and this was just amazing to watch.
Yeah, and the crowd too ate it a lot because again, like everybody knew how unprecedented this was. When he had 35, you could see the crowd being like, "Holy crap, Andre Miller has 30!" And then he kept going and going. And I remember like the bench was going nuts because it's Andre Miller. Like
everyone loves Andre Miller. Yeah,
right. Like everybody liked him, and he was just like, Andre Miller doesn't score points. Like what the hell is he doing? Like he was good scorer. Like he would get your 10 or 15 or whatever, but he was more interested in setting other guys up, being good at doing that sort of stuff. And then he just like explodes. He gets 50 points. It's just nuts. So. Yeah, anybody who watched him play, that's one that you'll appreciate almost more than anybody else on this entire list. But on the opposite end of the athleticism spectrum, we have Terrence Ross for the Toronto Raptors, 51 points, January 25th, 2014. Career averages for Ross of 10.1 points per game. That'll be interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later. 464 games so far because he's still obviously an active player. And yeah, you know him as kind of the okay athletic bench dude on the Magic. And yeah, he scored 50 points in a game once. January 25th, 2014, as we said, Ross scored a career high and franchise tying 51 points in a 126-118 loss to the Los Angeles Clippers. So in a loss to the Clippers, which is not the best, but hey, he was 16 of 29 from the floor, 10 of 17 from behind the arc. His 10 3-pointers set a career high, of course, and 9 of 10 from the free throw line. So he did it from just about everywhere. Good sampling of free throws, a lot of 3-pointers, and a little bit from the floor as well. Ross's performance tied the franchise record, the Raptors franchise record for points. It's set on my birthday, February 27th, 2000. I forgot when my birthday was for 2 seconds. I've been sick last week and I'm delirious and I'm on cough medicine, so I forgot when I was born. But February 27th, 2000, Vince Carter set that franchise record, I assume for me, because I was a big fan of his. So thank you, Vince Carter, for doing that. Ross entered the game averaging only 9.3 points per game, making him the first player in NBA history to have a 50-point game while averaging under 10 points per game in a season. This was after, I don't want to bring this up, but this is the Rudy Gay Raptors era, and they had traded Rudy Gay a little bit prior to this, and somebody had to score, so Terrence Ross.
Got some flashbacks.
Yeah, I'm sorry I had to do that. So I didn't want to. Nobody needed to. I like that Rudy has now kind of carved out his own little niche, and he's been better. But there was a time where Rudy Gay was like a much different player, and a much worse player, and a much harder player to watch, and this was that era. But this is the Rudy Gay Raptors era. But NBC Sports' Dan Feldman crunched the numbers immediately after this game, and this is what he came up with, what I think was pretty interesting as well. He says he's not a lock to remain the 50-point scorer with the lowest scoring average. Ross could definitely catch at least Tony Delk, who averaged 12.3 points per game in 2001 when he dropped 53 on the Sacramento Kings. But it's hardly a given that Ross will get there. How far back is he? Ross would have to score 51 in each of his next 2 games, and he would still trail Tony Delk. So yeah, he was very low on the points per game total that year. Interesting enough, Ross ended the year at 10.9 points per game. So he got to double digits, but he is still the lowest ever career averages for a guy who scored 50 points or the lowest season points per game average for a guy that scored 50 points in that season. So it's a little bit weird, but still, yeah, Terrence Ross, definitely not the guy you would think to score 50 points given, what he was doing that year and what he would do later that year. But Terrence Ross. So there you go.
Terrence Ross. Next, we got Corey Brewer joining our Minnesota Timberwolves journeyman.
You were on cough medicine as well, apparently.
Apparently.
We all got really high into this episode. Welcome to the Overback Podcast.
Yeah, there you go. Woo. 51 points on April 11th, 2014. His career averages 8.9 points per game in 790 games. So far in his career, he just recently had a stint with the Philadelphia 76ers, although he was cut from that team, so not currently active in the league. but you never know when he might come back. And yeah, this was actually his second stint with the Timberwolves, and randomly scored 51 points in a 112-110 win over the Houston Rockets. And yeah, he joined Michael Jordan, Allen Iverson, and Rick Barry as the only players to have 50-plus points and 6+ steals in one game. So yeah, he he's always a fun, energetic, pretty good role player, but not a guy who scored a lot of baskets. He in fact, if you look at his total 50-point games in his career, he just has one. Total 40-point games in his career, just one, which is a 50-point game. Total 30-point games in his career, just one, also a 50-point game. So, and only 54 games in his career with 20-plus points. So, his career high other than that is less than 30. So that is... he might be the most unlikely of. Yeah, I
didn't think when I was doing this list that he was, and then when I did those numbers, I was like, "Oh my god, Corey Brewer never scored like that much point." Like, yeah, he never even had 30 points. Like, what the hell?
Yes. So during this season, during the 2014 season, he actually averaged 12.3 points during this.
So he had a window that
season.
He stayed within.
Yeah. So he certainly. Certainly interesting things, and he would go on to move on. The next team he would play with would be the Rockets. He would be traded the next season to the Rockets. So the team that he victimized in this game. So perhaps they were, perhaps it was extra incentive for them to trade him.
Right. Well, we'll get to Corey Brewer. I mean, I've always liked Corey Brewer though. I always think he's a solid role player.
Yeah, he's fine. And then we have on our Timberwolves role player random list in the next season. Mo Williams, 52 points on January 13th, 2015. Now, Mo, was like a one-time All-Star. I didn't necessarily think of him being on this list, but only averaged really 13.2 points per game in his career, 818 games in his career. And yeah, that season he averaged 12.2 points for the team. In fact, was traded mid-season after this, a few weeks after this game to the Hornets, where he averaged 17.2 points per game, so and 14.2 total that season. So actually did best his career average despite being fairly late into his career. And yeah, before this, he had 2 40-point game in his career with the Cavaliers in a 2-week stretch in 2009. And his highest career scoring average was 17.8 points per game. It was in that 2009 season for Cleveland, in which he was a All-Star. So, and LeBron James can technically say that he played alongside a All-Star guard in his career before going on to
right.
So, yes.
So Williams, but yeah, no, he's an interesting one because like I don't necessarily think of Mo Williams as like unlikely to score 50 points. I think he was a pretty good scorer and a pretty good shooter and all that sort of stuff. But doing it as a member of the Minnesota Timberwolves in 2015 is just like, oh yeah, okay, like that's it. Like you would have thought, like I thought maybe he would have had like some weird explosion because you played for the Bucks prior to going to the Cavaliers, and he was kind of one of their top players, and then the Cavs obviously you're gonna have LeBron who's gonna take most of the points, but he was still he was an all-star at that point, and we're talking like a handful of years later, 2015 as a member of the Timberwolves, he scores 52. So he's an interesting one in that like I don't know that it's so unlikely that he was gonna score 50 points, but I just think the circumstances at which he scored 50 points are definitely unlikely. So
yeah, absolutely. And then our last one, Lou Williams of the Los Angeles Clippers, 50 points on January 10th, 2018, so just over a year ago as they recorded this podcast. His career average, 14 points per game in 24.5 minutes per game, so pretty good. That was lower than I expected, but if you consider the minutes per game, that's more in line with what I was expecting, 909 games. And his average that season was 22.6 points per game, which is a career high at age 31. And unlike most players, he keeps increasing his career average points per game into his early 30s. He didn't,
what the hell is he doing?
Yeah. Well, he didn't play a lot early in his career, so he's obviously had a big role for the Lakers and the Clippers in recent years, and in fact, all of his career 40-plus point games have come since the 2016 season, and have either been with the Lakers or the Clippers, and in fact, one was for the Clippers against the Lakers. So he loves to score in LA, apparently.
So that LA cooking, the tacos, I guess. I don't know.
I'm in
LA. I don't know what I guess tacos would be your maybe the ramen. He goes to Japantown and gets some ramen. I had some ramen in Japantown when I was there. It was quite good. So yeah, maybe that's what Lou's into. But yeah, I love Lou Williams. He's just a great character. So like, I don't know if he's unlikely to score 50, but it's like, he's like a bench guy too. I think that's the thing that's interesting about him is that he does it. He increases his scoring total without really starting all that many games. Like I think this year he started 0 games. I think last year he came off the bench like in 60 plus games or whatever and had to start only on necessity. So the man loves to come off the bench and he loves to score. But still, yeah, given that, it's tough to believe that he would ever amount 50 points because, like, yeah, coming off the bench, we heard about that. The only guy that did that was Nick Anderson, and he basically came off the bench only because they weren't quite sure if he was going to play at all in that game, and he comes out and plays most of the game and scores 50, where Lou Williams does it so much more efficiently that you feel like it's hard to ever get the momentum to get 50 points, but man, he did it here, and you know, I feel, I don't know, sky's the limit for Lou Williams. He could do it again, I think, you know, why not?
Why not indeed, yes. So there are a handful of other players who average less than 15 points per game in this career who have scored 50 plus in an NBA game. We didn't want this to go on forever, so we'll just list the last few here. A couple surprises here, I think. Rashard Lewis, 14.9 points per game, so barely makes that mark. I believe he's the only multi-time All-Star on this list, but I think that's driven down by the end of his career where he didn't play very much for a number of seasons. Yeah,
and there was the early part of his career too where I think he was still kind of finding himself. You know, those early Seattle years where he was kind of finding himself, and obviously has the peak in Seattle, the Orlando, and then obviously the end of his career where he's playing just spot minutes on the Heat team. But yeah, he's got the rings to show, so I'm sure he's okay.
There you go.
So
yeah. We got Michael Adams, 14.7 points, of course, known for those Denver Nugget teams that did a lot of run and gun. Jamal Crawford, this is lower than I expected, 14.7 for his career. And in fact, he has 3 50-point games, which is as many as Shaquille O'Neal. So, kind of a fun fact there.
Yeah, that's I guess, and we talked about that again. Like, if you go through a lot of these guys, like, maybe in the early set, like the first guys we talked about, a lot of them were, some bigger guys or some other ones, but then we pretty much gone guard heavy from the 80s until today, and it's tough to imagine any sort of big man, unless I guess nowadays with the big men shooting threes or whatnot, it makes a little bit more sense, but it seems a little tougher for big dudes to do it. So I guess I'm not shocked that Jamal Crawford has more 50-point games than Shaq, but still, it's just like, man, really? Like Shaq, it's Shaq. Like, you can just score at will, but yeah, it's just tougher when you're shooting twos all the time, and Jamal Crawford sometimes shoots threes. So.
Yeah, I mean, the guys who are doing it, the big guys now who are doing it are like your Anthony Davises and your Karl Anthony Towns, who, I mean, they're doing more than just going to the post. I mean, they're scoring from a lot of different places. They have a lot of range and whatever. I mean, Shaq, obviously he was unstoppable down low, but that he was going to be scoring within a fairly limited range, and it makes sense, but it's just kind of surprising.
Right. At the end of the day, somehow we've spent 5 minutes saying that 3 is more than 2, which is, but that's hey, sometimes that's basketball at its core, man. 3 is more than 2, so.
And 3 plus 2 equals 5, which is how long we talked about it. So it works out. So math lessons here on the Over and Back NBA podcast.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Two people that I'm not very good at math at all, so you definitely should not take any math advice from me. I think you're better than me, Jason, but do not take any from me. So.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I was a journalist for 15 years.
Exactly right. So actually, on second thought, don't take any math advice from either of us, because we both have journalism and communication degrees. So that's why the reason we have that is because we are bad at math. So.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I'm a programmer now, so am I good at math?
I was going to say, that's why I said you might be good at math now. So,
Right, maybe. I'll have to take a test and see how it goes. Anyway, other guys on this list, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf had 14.6 points, Cedric Ceballos 14.3, Clifford Robinson 14.2, Damon Stoudemire 13.4, another one that was much lower than I expected, and Vernon Maxwell 12.8 points per game. So yeah, that's your list of I believe we've gotten everybody on that list. So that's there you go. Those are your most unlikely 50-point scores. I guess you picked your choice. I gotta go. We talked about Corey Brewer. That's a good one. We talked about Terrence Ross, Andre Miller for sort of different reasons, and Walt Wesley. Honestly, at the beginning of the show, like who'd heard of Walt Wesley before? Going into this episode, that's he's even one that I was that I had not heard much about. So there you go.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm going Andre Miller just because it's knowing how he played. Like these other guys, like a lot of these guys are just good scorers that just weren't like good all around players. They just maybe didn't get the opportunity to do it, like a Tony Delk type. Like I mean it's completely random that he did it, but it makes sense that he might have been a guy that would do it. And Nick Anderson, of course, is a pretty good scorer and whatnot. And some other guys flirted with these 50-point games or whatever. But then like Andre Miller, like what? No, but Corey Brewer definitely stood out to me. I did not expect to be as blown away by Corey Brewer Brewer's lack of scoring history as I was. So he definitely is the sleeper of this, but I'm still going Andre Miller. I'm still going the professor just because, like, I feel like he would even feel uncomfortable about scoring 50 points. You know, like, when he was at 40, he'd probably be like, guys, just stop passing me the ball. Like, I don't want the ball. Like he never seemed like the guy who wanted that attention. So I could see him, because some guys relish in that. Like, you know, some guys are really like, oh, I'm at 40. Like, let's go. Let's, you know, feed me the ball. Andre Miller seems like he'd be the opposite of like, no, don't put me in. No, I don't want to play anymore. No, stop passing me the ball. Like, I don't want to score 50 points, but no, he did it anyway. So I think I'm going to go with Andre, but Corey Brewer, definitely a sleeper in this list for sure.
Absolutely. So, we do have one Twitter question that I want to address because I think it's interesting. I don't know if we're going to be able to answer it here, but I think it's definitely a future show discussion. At Snap Wilson wants us to discuss whether it's weirder that these guys had 50-point games or that Charles Barkley never had one in the regular season, at least.
Ooh, yeah, that's it. Because he was a good shooter too. Like, you know, Charles, you know, he could bang down low, but he was also a really, really good shooter. Wow, Charles Barkley never had a 50-point game, man. Yeah,
once in the playoffs he did, but not in the regular season. So, so that it's interesting. We're gonna have to dive into a list of guys who it's weirdest that never had a 50-point game.
Yeah, wow.
So
Charles is an interesting one because he was, you know, there was seasons where, especially that first year, the year he won the MVP in Phoenix, like, I forget his scoring average off the top of my head, but it was high. Like, yeah, you would have thought that season or some season, wow, Charles Barkley never had a 50-point game. That's a great show right there. Is like guys that you would assume, like, this is the opposite. This is the guys that you're like, no, that guy didn't have a 50-point game. Yeah, he did. I love the idea of a show of like, can you believe that X never had a 50-point game? And hopefully there's many more guys on the list other than Charles Barkley, and I'm sure there are. But wow, that's man, I don't know what to think about that. That's nuts.
There you go. Well, Snap, thank you for offering that question, and we'll tackle that one in a future episode. That's a fun question. So, and if anyone else wants to throw us episode ideas, whether it's 50-point related or not, you can tweet us at Over and Back NBA. Also, we're on Facebook.com at Over and Back NBA. Either way, we'll get your message and we will answer you or try to address something on the show. And you can find us at the Step Back at fansided.com. Lots of great NBA coverage there and some good stuff you can check out. And also, we're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, we're on TuneIn, we're on services you'd never even heard of. So,
right.
Yes.
You've never used it, you're never going to use it. But hey, if we are, I think we always say that. If we are on a service that you use, I use this random app that you've never heard of, let us know because we'll do whatever we can to make sure that we are on that random app that you've never heard of. So let us know. If we are on something that you use and we are not there, let us know. We will be on there soon.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And remember, shoot or shoot.